Welcome to the Lost Archives. Quiet stories from forgotten history. Each night, we open a single file from the past. A vanished city, a misplaced discovery, a life almost erased from record. There is no spectacle here, no urgency, only the patient unfolding of what once was. And together, we'll turn the page. In a stone room above the Ionian Sea, a monk has been sitting at the same desk since dawn. His breath fogs in the cold. He dips a goose quill into oak gall ink and resumes copying, tracing words that were first written 7 centuries before he was born. The room is a scriptorium, a hall set aside for manuscript copying, positioned on the north side of the cloister to catch daylight without direct sun. No candles are permitted near the work. No talking. No corrections without permission from the master of the scriptorium. Beneath his quill is vellum, calfskin scraped thin and dried under tension. A single Bible requires 500 skins. The ink is iron gall, crushed oak galls, iron sulfate, and gum arabic, corrosive enough to eat through the page over centuries. He is copying a Roman poet who died in 19 BCE. He does not know how many rooms the text passed through before arriving here, or how many it will pass through after. For 4 centuries after the fall of Rome, monasteries were the only institutions in Western Europe still copying books systematically. Not by plan, not because anyone saw what was coming. What we call the classical world, Virgil, Tacitus, Cicero, Lucretius, exists because of rooms like this one. If those rooms had never existed, what would remain? Rome at its height had 28 public libraries within the city walls. The largest, the Bibliotheca Ulpia, completed by Trajan in 114 CE, held an estimated 20,000 volumes in each of its 2 wings, 1 Greek, 1 Latin. A commercial book trade had operated since the 3rd century BCE. Educated slaves copied texts by hand. Booksellers called bibliopoli sold them in shops near the Forum. Books were affordable to anyone literate and employed. Between 100 and 400 CE, Western readers shifted from papyrus scrolls to bound codices. The transition required manually recopying every existing scroll into the new format. Many were not recopied. After 476 CE, the urban infrastructure that had sustained book culture collapsed with the empire that built it. Cities shrank, roads deteriorated. The booksellers and their copying workshops had no patrons and no supply chain. Papyrus required recopying every 70 to 100 years in the damp Western climate, or it crumbled. By 500 CE, no institution in Western Europe had the organization to do this work consistently. Approximately 99% of ancient Greek and Latin literature has been lost. We have roughly 1/3 of Aristotle's known works. Most of Sappho survives as fragments. Entire genres, Roman comedy, most Greek lyric poetry, exist only as titles. The last scholarly Romans, Boethius, executed in 524 CE, Priscian the grammarian, writing in Constantinople, were isolated individuals without institutions behind them. When they died, the chain they represented did not continue. In 554 CE, a former chief minister to the Ostrogothic kings retired to his family estates on the Ionian seacoast of Calabria. Cassiodorus was nearly 70 years old. He built a monastery and began filling its library. He called the monastery Vivarium. Its library held 231 codices by 92 different authors. the only 6th century monastic library of which we have a detailed inventory. Medical texts, philosophy, the complete works of Josephus, agricultural treatises. Cassiodorus also wrote the Institutiones, a curriculum specifying what his monks should read and in what order. It became the framework for monastic education across the West for the next 3 centuries. 25 years before Vivarium, in 529 CE, Benedict of Nursia had founded a monastery on the hilltop of Monte Cassino and written the governing document of Western monasticism. Chapter 48 stated, "Idleness is the enemy of the soul." The rule mandated 5 hours of manual labor per day, combined with lectio divina, sacred reading. Copying manuscripts was understood as both. A scribe at work was a monk at prayer. The two things were not separable. Columba left Donegal in 563 CE with 12 companions and landed on a small island off the west coast of Scotland. He named it Iona and built a monastery. Within a generation, its scriptorium was producing manuscripts that travelled across northern Britain and into Gaul. Another Irish monk, Columbanus, walked from Ireland across Gaul, founding monasteries as he went. Annegray, Louzet, Fontaine, and in 614 CE established the monastery of Bobbio in the Apennines. He died there 14 months later. Bobbio's library would eventually reach 700 volumes. What the Irish missionaries carried was a culture of close engagement with the written page. Irish monasteries had been copying Latin and Greek texts since the 5th century, preserving works that had filtered north when the Roman provinces fragmented. In 634 CE, the Northumbrian king Oswald invited an Irish monk named Aidan from Iona to evangelize his kingdom. Aidan chose a tidal island off the northeast coast of England, Lindisfarne, and built his monastery there. Around 755 CE, the bishop of Lindisfarne, Edfrith, took approximately 150 calfskins and began writing a gospel book. He wrote and illuminated every page himself, 259 leaves of interlaced knotwork, zoomorphic borders, and dense carpet pages. At Wearmouth Jarrow, the abbot Ceolfrith was simultaneously commissioning 3 complete Bibles, each requiring 500 sheep. One of them, the Codex Amiatinus, is the oldest surviving complete Latin Bible. Ceolfrith died in 716 CE, carrying it toward Rome, at Longue in Burgundy. Also at Wearmouth Jarrow was a monk named Bede, who arrived at age 7 and never left. Over 50 years, he produced 48 known works: biblical commentaries, astronomical tables, history. His monastery also produced the oldest surviving manuscript of Pliny's natural history north of the Alps. On June 8, 793 CE, Norse ships appeared without warning off the coast of Lindisfarne. Monks were killed on the beach, others thrown into the sea, others taken as slaves. Alcuin of York wrote that never before had such terror appeared in Britain. Iona was raided in 795 CE, then burned in 802 CE. In 806 CE, a third attack killed 68 monks on the shore. The survivors carried their unfinished gospel book, the manuscript eventually known as the Book of Kells, to the inland monastery of Kells in Ireland. Between 795 and 845 CE, Irish annals record approximately 75 attacks on monasteries. The losses cannot be fully calculated because no inventory survives of what was in the buildings when they burned. Against this destruction, Charlemagne issued the Admonitio Generalis in 789 CE, ordering the correction of corrupted texts across all monasteries in his empire and the establishment of monastic schools throughout the Frankish realm. Alcuin of York had been educated at the Cathedral School of York, which held one of the finest libraries in the north. At Aachen, from 782 CE, he taught Charlemagne and his sons the full liberal arts program: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, music, geometry, astronomy. In 796 CE, Alcuin became abbot of Saint-Martin at Tours. There, he standardized the script used for all manuscript production under Charlemagne: clear, rounded letter forms, consistent word spacing, uniform baseline, called Caroline minuscule. Tours produced 2 large-format corrected Bibles per year for the empire. From Tours, St. Gall, Fulda, Corbie and Reims together came approximately 7,000 manuscripts in the 9th century alone. For every text that survived from before 800 CE, 10 copies were made in that single 100-year period. The survival of the classical tradition was mostly accomplished in those 100 years. At Fulda, scribes around 850 CE copied books 1 through 6 of Tacitus's Annals, the history of Rome under Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius, onto a single manuscript. When the work was done, the manuscript was sent east to the monastery of Corvey in Saxony. There, it was not copied again. For roughly 6 centuries, the only surviving copy of half of Tacitus's account of the early Roman emperors sat in a single building in Saxony, unread. One fire, one flood, one raid on the wrong monastery, and it would have been gone. Around 1513, Pope Leo X acquired the Tacitus manuscript from Corvey. The monks received a printed edition and a papal indulgence in exchange. Filippo Beraldo used the original to prepare the first printed edition of those 6 books, published in 1515. In January 1417, a papal secretary named Poggio Bracciolini entered a German monastery, almost certainly Fulda, and found a manuscript of Lucretius's De Rerum Natura. The poem had not circulated in the West for roughly 1,000 years. Poggio could not remove the original. He had it copied. That copy generated 50 further transcriptions across Florence and Venice, was first printed in 1473, and eventually carried its materialism into the thought of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. Petrarch spent years combing monastic libraries before finding Cicero's personal letters, the Epistulae ad Atticum, in the Cathedral of Verona in 1345, unknown to the medieval world for 5 centuries. Many of Cicero's other works survive solely through Carolingian copies made in the 9th century. The Abbey Library of St. Gall in Switzerland holds approximately 2,100 manuscripts dating from the 8th through the 15th century, one of the oldest intact library collections in the world. Its oldest documents predate Charlemagne. Renaissance humanists, encountering Caroline minuscule in recovered Carolingian manuscripts, mistook it for ancient Roman script and adopted it as their own. The earliest typeface designers based their fonts on it. The letter forms in this sentence descend from a script invented at Tours in 796 CE. None of this was coordinated. No archive held authority over which text survived. Different monasteries copied different things based on what happened to reach them. The classical world was preserved by accident, the accumulated consequence of a rule against idleness. The monk in Northumbria sets down his quill when the bell rings for Vespers. He does not know what will still be readable 1,000 years from now. He has done his hours. The page is full.